YouTube channel, and then
will you be able to say how many people are watching?
it won't tell us immediately, but there's 19 people waiting at the minute. So there's 19 people watching now, and usually it builds up within the first 5 minutes.
Okay.
So that's us live now. Just quickly say hi to all of our members again. Thank you for joining us. We've got Ben Addy with us from Moxon. We just heard a little bit about what he's going to speak about, and we're excited to hear more. So I'll pass over to him and mute myself. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to speak with you this evening. As we were just talking before going live, as it were, that my plan this evening is not so much to talk about the work that we do as a practice, although I think it's inevitable that I will, because architects, putting up a slide of their own design work, they're bound to start talking about the detail. So that will inevitably happen. But actually, what I really want to talk about is some of my own personal, but also the practice's experience, and I guess without trying to sound too grandiose, some of the lessons that we've learned over the course of the last, I don't know, 15, 16 years or so that the practice has been in operation. And more particularly, actually, the last it's 20 years since I got my diploma. Well, not quite to the day or the month, but 2 decades. And I think in that period of time, there are things that you kind of slowly start to learn. And I think these are the sorts of topics that I'd like to talk about this evening. So I suppose it's sort of neatly encapsulated by this quote from Andy Macmillan. Obviously the fantastic, one of Scotland's best ever architects, and it's rather a pointed quote, but I think also rather beautiful as well, which is, don't listen to what an architect says, look instead at what they do. And I suppose this evening, like I say, what I'd like to do is show you some images of the work that we do, but more particularly explain how we got to those positions to work on those projects, and also a bit of I guess my own background in terms of how I got to where I am, and like I say, the work that we're doing as a practice. So I guess part of the reason for that is that I'd like to kind of offer, like I say, those lessons that I've learned, but also offer some encouragement to anyone else listening to be confident in terms of forging your own path, whether that's setting up your own practice or setting up an alternative type of business, or indeed working in practice or in a different field of design, what have you. Ultimately, it's what I'd like to convey is that sense of confidence that once you leave Scott Sutherland's, the world is your oyster, really. So I grew up in Aberdeenshire here. So I grew up in Aboyne, went to Aboyne Primary School, then Aboyne Academy, and you can see this is a kind of rather crude timeline. You can see when I then went to ECA in Edinburgh for my degree, and then a year out in London at Chris Wilkinson Architects, and then onwards to setting up my practice in 2004. And then, as you can see, 2012, I set up another company, which is a general building contracting company. And then in 2019, a little cafe, which is attached to the studio where I'm talking to you from now. And then actually last year, I set up a small development company as well. So like I say, the world is your oyster. And to sort of, I suppose, sort of demonstrate a little bit from my point of view, I incorporated the first of those companies, the architecture practice, on the 25th of October in 2004, which was the day that I received my Part 3 qualification. Don't hang about. And as a practice, we kind of fortunately become involved in all sorts of different types of work, from infrastructure projects. This is new station in East London that we did for Transport for London. Get involved in quite a lot of fit out projects. This is an office space in central London. Bridges, and I'll be talking quite a lot about bridges in a moment. private residential projects. Like any practice, any young practice will get involved in this sort of work, and it's a fantastic kind of test bed. We're also very keen on product design, and this is a very early competition winning design for a chair and ottoman. And I think product design is a really interesting avenue for architects to pursue. In our case, we do it sort of on the side, if you like, but it's a very interesting kind of avenue if you're that way inclined. With as you leave Scott Sutherland's, it can be a really rewarding thing to do if architecture is not quite your thing, shall we say. And then as well, we get involved in lots of new build projects. So when you kind of look at the overall workload of the practice, and this is over the course of the last, like I say, 16 years or so, it roughly breaks down into this kind of picture. Now this is by fee turnover, actually, but it's quite a good metric in terms of understanding where you are as a practice. And then if you look at how the practice and then the other companies indeed have grown, you can see way back in 2004, this is the annual turnover of the company at that point, which was essentially enough to sustain me as an individual. And then how it's grown. And you can see at the right-hand side, this is the practice in 2019, and it's kind of continued in that vein since then. And this, I suppose, leads on to the kind of the first lesson, if you like, which is to become a specialist. To become a specialist, that is, in whatever it is that the client is looking for. When I did my year out in practice, the very first project that I worked on was this really extraordinary suspension bridge in the Pindos Mountains in northern Greece. This is it's a World Heritage Site, actually. This is the Metsavitikos Gorge, and you can see in the center of the frame. You can see in the center of the frame the suspension bridge, which is a rock-anchored suspension bridge, actually carrying a motorway. And there's a tunnel at either end that goes through the mountainside. That led on. I worked at Chris Wilkinson Architects, or Wilkinson Air, for a couple of years, and actually carried on working for them whilst I was doing my diploma, because living in London is very expensive. And that led through several bridge projects and competitions and things. This is the final project that I worked on at Wilkinson Air. Which is this is the Sutong Yangtze River Bridge, which is it's got I think it's a 1,088 meter main span between those two. Excuse me, the phone's ringing. Leaving Moxon Architects. This is the Yangtze River Bridge, which is I think up until 2012, it had the longest main span of any cable stay bridge in the world. So if you like, that was in a way my sort of swan song. This was the last project that I worked on at Wilkinson Air. And then when I set up my own practice, this was the first project that I worked on, or nearly the first project, certainly the first bridge, which is from a kilometre-long suspension bridge to a 12-metre long footbridge at the top of Glen Tanner here in Aberdeenshire. But this, of course, led on to other bridge projects here in Taunton, central London. Again, up here in Aberdeenshire, this is a concept scheme for a bridge across the River Dee at Braemar, and then on to various other structures around the world. This is a bridge in I think the Czech Republic. I'm always rather tickled by this quote from the late great Cedric Price, that no one should be interested in the design of bridges. And although I dearly love the work of Cedric Price, I can't really subscribe to this statement. Bridges, in fact, are, to my mind, are sort of fascinating things for architects to get involved with, because in a way they are kind of pure design. They're somewhere between building design and product design. They have questions of scale and context, and to a certain extent function that buildings will have, but on the other hand, they have a kind of there's a sort of pure instrumentality to a bridge. It needs to get from A. Bridges tend to need to get from A to B, and that kind of the purity of the problem, if you like, is a great attraction to me as a designer, and certainly I think I speak for everyone in the practice in that way. This is a bridge that we completed a couple of years ago in central London across Regent's Canal. So this is a rather kind of crude drawing in a way, but it describes a lot of the kind of dimensional and functional problems that we had to grapple with in terms of the design of this bridge. So you can see the overall length of the structure. There's a gradient across the length of the structure. You can see there's a minimum clearance over the canal channel, and then there's a towpath. There's also complications at the right-hand side here to do with existing structural walls and avoiding damage to existing, to the neighbours effectively. And several other complications that are all kind of represented by this drawing. And then you can kind of elaborate on that with the plan drawing as well. So again, there was a certain envelope that we needed to fit our structure in. So these are the kind of the site constraints. And then, like I say, I think that the idea of a bridge being something that is so instrumental and does deal with these sorts of parameters and constraints is a really sort of fascinating thing. And I think as an architect, you immediately try and reduce these things down to their elemental problems, if you like. So the next sequence of diagrams really kind of describe those problems in those two drawings in even clearer terms, and then how we can look at actually creating a bridge or designing a bridge rather that will achieve those ends. So you can see we're starting to understand the problem through diagrams. So understand the logic, if you like, of what we need to achieve, depending on, in this case, the location of the structure. So over the canal, there was a desire for lightness and slenderness. But then as we come off the bridge and then go on to the adjacent site, it was very important that we had a secure edge to the approach. We then look at the structural form as well in terms of whether we can sit the structure on the ground or whether we're going to be spanning indeed over the canal channel, and then how that translates into a kind of almost a building form or almost a bridge form. And then as you start to lay these things together, and that starts to lead on to a certain discussion in terms of, like I say, how the structure can be formed, but then also what the experience is of the bridge users. And then sort of cutting the chase, as it were, through the whole design process, it then takes you to the point of fabrication. And the reason I use this particular bridge, like I say, in King's Cross, as an example, is that many bridges are made of components, or usually bridges are like buildings. They're made of lots of individual components kind of fitted together or bolted together or what have you. In this case, the bridge is almost one single element. So that sense of instrumentality that I was talking about is encapsulated with one single item, one single physical component, which is the main span of the bridge, 48 meters long, is one single welded piece of steel. That was, I mean, it's an extraordinary piece of work in terms of the quality of the workmanship and what have you. But like I say, it's that kind of irreducible minimum, if you like. This is a sort of a bridge that's of extreme simplicity. It's just this single component that does all the work. You can see it has this very pronounced form. Now, I mean, I'm talking about it in very functional terms, but the form of this bridge and the expression of this bridge it also needs to relate to the context. So you can see in the background there's some grade 1 listed brickwork arches. There's an existing bridge just to the left hand side of the frame there, and in fact the whole context, this is in King's Cross, the new Argent development, the whole context is surrounded by these sort of wonderful industrial revolution and later structures, many of which are listed. So the bridge needs to find its own expression within that kind of context as well. And then there are other things that come into play. So I don't know if you recall, the plan showed that the bridge deck was a very pronounced skew, a very sort of diagonal line across the canal. But nevertheless, we needed to provide a clear line of sight down the canal. So you can see in this image that those stiffener plates that give the bridge torsional stiffness and torsional strength are aligned with the canal rather than with the bridge. So you can maintain those clear views from one end of the canal down to the other. The structure doesn't impact upon that clear view. And then, of course, the detailing is crucially important in terms of how people interact with the structure. You can see here that how the handrails kind of deal with that, the kind of bowed form of the primary structure, and how the handrail migrates to deal with that change in geometry. There's another view with some of the context. And like I say, being a specialist, or at least giving your clients or potential clients the confidence that you are a specialist is very important to kind of generating work and what have you. And projects like this have led on to some much larger projects. This is a bridge in across the River Serchio in Lucca in Italy, and then indeed for the last few years we've been working on the largest infrastructure project in Europe, which is High Speed 2, Phase 1. So this is the high-speed rail link between London and Birmingham. We are the architect for what's called the C2 and C3 central section of the line that goes from the middle of the Chilterns all the way up to Leamington Spa. And our involvement is primarily relating to bridges and viaduct structures. Here you can see one of 15 viaducts that we're working on with this incredible team of engineers and construction specialists. This is Wendover Dean Viaduct, but there are another 14 viaducts that we're working on, and as well as 70 bridges and I think it's right, 3 tunnels and various other structures. So that first bridge that I showed you that we worked on at the top of Glen Tanner, which was, like I say, only 10, 12 meters long, has led, you can draw a line directly from that project through to our involvement on HS2 and the kind of extraordinary structures that we're getting involved with there. Now, of course, on the one hand, you could say that the small bridge at Glen Tanner, we had a huge amount to do with that because we designed the entire thing. And obviously, in the case of something as extraordinarily technically demanding as a high-speed rail structure, our role as the architect is relatively small, but nevertheless, you can have a sort of an outsized impact by virtue of the visibility of the structure. So the consideration for the piers and how the deck is held, consideration for how the structure sits in the landscape, the composition in terms of the spacing of the supports, the way in which the deck cross-section is kind of composed. All of these things are things that architects are kind of very well placed to advise on and to get involved with. So, you know, there's certainly room for architects, even on these very large civil infrastructure projects. I think it was probably the end of the little movie there. And you know, I think things like HS2 are you know, if you're interested in that sort of very large scale type of work, then again, I would encourage you, as I did, to seek out practices that get involved in that sort of work, because it is a fascinating world, both technically but also, you know, aesthetically, and in terms of how these things relate to context. Here's another of the viaducts we're working on, and again, it's this question of detail, the question of scale, the question of how you provide these very large structures with a sense of human scale. And then in some instances, you can be working on structures that are really quite straightforward. You know, they are not iconic in any way. They're structures that are subservient to the landscape that they sit in, and yet it's still crucial to consider the detail. So you can see here a pier for this viaduct. You can see the kind of the connecting piece from the deck and how these two things relate to one another. In a sense, it's similar to a keystone in a masonry arch, or a boss on a cathedral vault, and it's about how we tie together the structure. So how you bring the beams for the deck in, you bring the pier up to catch those beams, and then what do you do with that bit in the middle? Is it pure function, or is there space for architectural or kind of aesthetic expression? And I strongly believe there is. And so you can see here, although this is a very straightforward structure, the consideration for how these things join together is really key, and it provides the whole thing with a sense of kind of consideration, really. And I can go on and we can talk about, you know, several of these structures. There's another one just further to the north, in South Northamptonshire, I think it is, across the canal. And again, it's this sort of, although these structures, some of them are very simple from an architectural point of view, there's still the kind of level of craft and detail and consideration, in this case for materials, that you can bring into them. And then also, as you look at a family of structures, such as on the railway, you can start to identify opportunities where you have kind of commonality of detail and commonality of approach. So this is yet another viaduct, and it's how we're looking at the way in which that structure sits in the landform in as simple and elegant a way as possible. It's also a marvelous opportunity, this project, for back to the kind of world of footbridges and what have you that we kind of started off with. And this is a scheme here for a family of footbridges on the railway. And again, it's about kind of structural expression. It's a very particular way of working as an architect. You know, it's not about the kind of functional layout of something, but it is about a kind of a structural rationale and a kind of the experience of a user and detailing is of real importance. This is a timber bridge we're working on in Germany. I mean, you start to sort of forge relationships with people and with other engineers and consultants and what have you. This is a bridge, like I say, in Germany that we are working on with a fantastic company called Maybach, who specialize in timber structures. This is currently, we're in detailed design with this. I think this should be on site later this year. We have a great relationship with this company. This is actually a competition for a series of bridges that we submitted, I think it was a month or two ago. We found out today, actually, that we came second in this competition, which is a real shame for us, although we did beat Kengo Kuma, so that's quite nice. It softened the blow a little bit. But again, here you can see we're looking at the use of timber, in this case, glulam beams, and sort of stacking them together, and then using that as permanent formwork for a concrete deck. So it's quite an inventive way of looking at a timber bridge. The concrete provides a wearing surface, but it also keeps the weather off, so the timber will last longer. And then closer to home, we're currently working on, or starting to work on, the eastern section of the A96, where there are several really important bridge structures that we're going to be working on over the next few years. And it's wonderful to be working in the northeast as well, given that we're based up here. The next lesson, I guess, is risk. Is to do with risk and reward, which is something that you tend not to learn about at architecture school, but it's really crucial if you're looking to ever have your own practice or run your own business. There's a direct correlation between these two things. So here's that pie chart again with all the different work and the different kind of sectors and areas and specialisms and things that we get involved with. But in a curious way, the most important category, if you like, is competitions. So you can see here that tiny sliver. Now, this is obviously expressed in terms of fee. So in the case of competitions, it's where we've been paid to enter a competition or whether we've won something at the end of it. So it's a very modest part of the practice. But you could probably flip this, you probably invert this and say that in terms of effort and the amount of energy that you put into things, certainly competitions are a kind of an outsized aspect of the work we do. These slides that you can see here, this is always slightly depressing. This is, I think, the first 10 years of practice, and these are all our competition submissions. Generally speaking, they were open competitions, free to enter. There was no fee, and every now and then we'd win one. But that, like I say, that's 10 years, and in the last 6 years, I'm sure we've done just as many, and it's kind of sobering looking at that. And indeed, every now and then, when you look at the architectural press, you'll see kind of headlines like this. I mean, I'm not picking on Harry Phillips. He's an extremely good architect. But I'm always sort of rather tickled when I see these sorts of things. Competitions offer terrible odds for a lean return. It's certainly true. I mean, we in the sense that tiny sliver on the pie chart a moment ago, in terms of what you get, if you like, the reward in a purely financial sense is so small as to be irrelevant. But I think the point is that your return isn't so much in kind of monetary terms. It's what these things lead to, and a good kind of example of this is this very small project. This was a drinking fountain. It was an international competition that we won. When was this? 2007, 8, 9, early 2000s. For a drinking fountain for the Royal Parks in London. It was an open international competition. I think there were about 80 or so entrants, and we won the competition. We were one of two joint winners, and we were fortunate to then put the fountain into a prototype stage. So you can see here some of the detailed computer models. Again, this is the sort of product design of things, so it's about fascination with detail and like the sort of functionality and the instrumentality of an object. But also we got involved because the design was to the intention was always to fabricate this fountain from bronze. So we had a fantastic relationship with this bronze foundry in North Wales who made the prototype with us. And that understanding in terms of material and process and what have you led directly onto a commission for Westminster City Council for a new ticket office in Leicester Square, which was a bronze building. And there was something in the form and the expression of the fountain that the council saw, and that was part of the reason why we were approached to look at this bronze building in Leicester Square. And then we did further work for the Royal Parks as well. This is a converted and extended upwards boathouse on the Serpentine Lake. Unfortunately, this is not reached site, but a wonderful project to work on nonetheless. Another example of an open competition that leads to greater things. This is something that's very kind of close to my heart, I suppose. This is some sketches of an overhead power mast for high-speed rail. So this is the kind of the cantilever arms that hold the electrical catenary system for powering the train. And you can see here, well, we won the competition. We were one of 3 winners, and again, fortunate enough to take the design into prototyping. So there is a photograph of one of the prototypes at a test track again in Wales, and you can see the kind of level of detail and control and craft that one needs to go into in the design of these things. You can, I mean, I can talk for hours about, just precisely why this thing is the way it is. But I suppose the kind of key aspect of it, if you compare it to those pylons in the background, is that our pylon has 70% fewer components than the standard electrical overhead line mast for the railway. So reducing the number of parts, and it does this through the use of a really remarkable material, which is it's what's called permally, which is a densified wood laminate. So effectively that kind of boom that you can see on the image there, and in fact you can see it, a one-to-one prototype hanging on the wall behind me, is made of wood, but it's wood combined with sort of high pressure epoxy to form a very strong and very high electrical strength component. So it does all of the insulating. So you don't need any of the kind of ceramic pots and rings and things. This one component does everything for you. And that project, that competition, led on to our involvement with HS2 proper, as it were, in terms of the major civils works, bridges. This is one of the tunnels that we're working on. So, although, like I say, I really highly rate Bell Phillips and Hari Phillips in terms of architecture, but I think, the reward for competitions might be quite limited if you just focus on the immediate consequence of winning a competition, perhaps. But it's where being involved in competitions, because they take you out of your comfort zone. They force you to think about things that you're not involved with in your ordinary practice, and that leads on to all sorts of avenues and possibilities. The next kind of lesson, I suppose, is try not to be too proud, and I suppose it sort of follows on a bit from the point about the competitions, in that don't be too proud. Don't expect the world in entering these competitions, but do sort of be cognizant of where they can lead. And similarly, if a client comes and knocks on your door and asks you to look at something, it's worth sort of always hearing them out. This is this is a kitchenette that we designed and helped to install and what have you for some neighbours here on D side. Now the neighbours happen to be the owners of Hauser and Wirth, which is, I think, the world's probably most influential commercial art gallery. So obviously they're extremely, they're fascinating people, although this wasn't necessarily the most fascinating project. And I think that's the point about don't be too proud, because if we hadn't got ourselves involved in this project, we wouldn't have become involved in the next project for the client, which was a lovely little bridge across the river again here in Upper D side, and you can see the technical drawings. This project was quite important to us, not only from an architectural point of view, but we were also the main contractor. So we made the bridge, or rather, Tor Contracting, one of my other companies, made the bridge, fabricated it, and then took it to site, installed it, and what have you. So that came from the kitchenette, as did this next project, again for the same client, same part of the world. This is a small cabin, a kind of a shieling at the top of Glengairn. The idea being that, although very simple in programmatic terms, that the building would sort of take on the formation of the drumlins in the landscape. You can see how it sort of sits in the kind of form of that landscape. Very, very simple project, very, very economical. These very small double glazed units forming the windows with specific views that they're framing out into the glen. But extremely humble and modest. Now, this led on to a really interesting kind of challenge when one day the clients asked us to look at this segment of a floor plan, and with a view to turning it into a hotel, a 5-star modern hotel. These are a sequence of rooms, there's some corridors. They didn't tell me where this was, just that it was somewhere in Scotland, and could we have a look at it? So we took the plan and spent the next 2 weeks putting together ideas and options for how this could be turned into a kind of a piece of or a fragment of a high quality hotel. And I'm ashamed to say that even though this is a rather characteristic profile for the elevation of a building in terms of these bay windows and what have you, I think it took me a week and a half to realize that it was actually the Five Arms Hotel in Braemar. Which is, about, I don't know, 6 miles away from where I'm talking to you. And so we won the commission. So after that sort of competitive interview process, which we were only invited to because of the previous projects, we won the commission, and then started to kind of analyze this building in terms of circulation, how the building worked, or how the building wasn't working at the time, and what needed to be done to make it work. You can see here some of the kind of construction photos. The reason I'm kind of dwelling on the construction side of this is that we were also the main contractor for this project. So the experience of designing and building the bridge for this client, Glencairn, led to us being the designer, but also the builder for this much larger project, which we carried out for the client through what's called a construction management contract, whereby we effectively ran 45, I think it was 45 separate contracts together with our sister company, Tor Contracting, and also a really fantastic firm of quantity surveyors in Edinburgh called Cromar Brooks. So we effectively took on all the responsibilities of the main contractor and delivered this project for the client. So it was obviously an extraordinary jump in scale from the bridge, but a really rewarding project. And here's some of our own team of joiners. We also did the kind of the new build components at the back of the hotel as a design and build contract. So we were directly building that component as well. And the hotel, I mean, I don't know how many of you have been to it, but it's an extraordinary place. It's amazing kind of restoration of the building and reinstatement of the Fife as a sort of, at least the architectural centerpiece of the village. Has really kind of remarkable interiors by Russell Sage Studios in London, and a sort of extraordinary collection of art as well. I mean, there's a Lucian Freud in the entrance. There's a Picasso you can just make out in the window on the right-hand side there. Picasso hanging in the drawing room. There's a Bruegels, there's a Gert Richter, there's a Louise Bourgeois in the courtyard. It's absolutely, if you've not been, I'd thoroughly recommend it. It's an incredible place. Here's some other photos of it. There's the Louise Bourgeois spider in the courtyard. It's an extraordinary thing to find in Braemar. Certainly growing up in the area, it's the last thing I'd have expected to see. And that project's led on to other work for the same client. This is a farm shop that we've just recently completed for them down at their gallery in Somerset, which is the building on the right there. So it's within this kind of farmyard kind of campus, which has been turned into this really beautiful gallery. And this farm shop is a very simple building, but there's kind of opportunities in the interior to look at the detail and using kind of agricultural or tailored agricultural techniques in the formation of the architecture. And we're now working on the conversion, restoration, refurbishment of the other big hotel in Braemar. So this is the Invercold Arms, and we're working for the client on a whole range of different uses, very exciting uses on the ground to the rear of that building. And it all came from the kitchenette. So like I say, don't be too proud. Things lead in all sorts of remarkable directions. Next lesson, I suppose, is teaching is a good way to learn. This is again, it's something very close to my heart. I was really fortunate actually last week to be involved with David and Karen, and also Andrew, one of my colleagues, in doing some reviews for some of the stage 5 students, looking at some really exciting work. And my own background is that I whilst I was working and practicing in London, I was a tutor at the Bartlett UCL for 9 years as well. So these are just some images of some of the work that there's a rather younger looking me in the middle there, some of the work that the students got involved with. And I think it's the kind of it's the sense of experimentation and the kind of the freedom and what have you that that you get through working in college projects that's very rewarding. And I think it's extremely rewarding on a personal level as well. People come from all sorts of different backgrounds, obviously, and you become exposed to a whole range of different ideas, and it kind of shakes you out of the kind of complacency that you might be inclined to fall into, particularly when you're practicing on your own. It can be a real kind of I suppose creative lifeline in a way. So I'd thoroughly recommend it to anyone. You see here some amazing kind of maquettes and models, and then sort of kind of getting back into the kind of the craft of hand drawings and things, and indeed computer drawings. It's a really wonderful experience to be involved with teaching. So recommend it to anyone. I think the this is the final little lesson, if you like, which is to always go for the high bar. Now this isn't my quote at all. This is something that was a few years ago. We got involved in a competition that was being run by, I think it was Chorus Steel, for a steel house, and it was a kind of an international competition, and they shortlisted, I think it was something like 10 architects, and it was such good fun because they took those 10 architects or those 10 practices, and they flew them all to Helsinki, and we were one of them. But the other architects came from all over the world, and there's one in particular, a guy called Peter Stotchbury, who is an Australian architect, a wonderful architect, and I'd thoroughly recommend that that you look at his work. He's kind of the next generation down from Glenn Murcutt, or or 2 generations down from Rick Leplastrier. A really extraordinary architect, and a great fun to be with as well. And I always remember that at the end of the 4 days, 5 days, what have you, that we were all working together, his parting words were to always go for the high bar. Sort of don't settle, if you like. Always try and push things. And I think that's a kind of a really good kind of motto to sort of end on, in a way. This is a project that we did for the Cairngorm National Park Authority in Granton-on-Spey recently, well, a couple of years ago now. And I think the Park Authority as a client, they weren't sure about the things that we were talking about. We were very keen to use cross-laminated timber and glulam and what have you. And after some persuasion, they bought into the idea. But this is a completely new thing for us as well. So, this is not something that we'd ever done before. But aiming slightly higher, can take you to places that you wouldn't necessarily have got to otherwise. And indeed, the use of cross-laminated timber and mass timber has become a very important part of the practice. This is a building here that's, again, for the same client as the King's Cross Bridge. But this is in Brent Cross, further north in London, which is also cross-laminated timber. So that experience on that small project up in Granton-on-Spey, and the kind of, I wouldn't say it was an experiment for us, but it was certainly pushing us into a new place in terms of construction technology, has led on to the use of CLT and glulam and what have you on this project in Brent Cross. In a similar way, I could talk about the project that we completed a couple of years ago in Fraserburgh for Aberdeenshire Council, and this is to do with obviously the use of weathering steel, and again sort of pushing expectations, pushing your own expectations, but also the expectations of the client, in this case the council, and also working with statutory authorities, so working with planning departments, Historic Environment Scotland, and what have you, to really see how far you can go in terms of an architectural approach, an architectural language that might be quite unexpected otherwise for the client, or indeed for the town that the project is situated in. And then I think the final thing to sort of say about aiming for the high bar is also sort of pushing yourself in terms of the risk and the exposure that you're prepared to take on yourself. So you can see here, there's a obviously self-explanatory headline. I'm talking to you from our studio here in Crathy, and this is a building that we have kind of closed the circle completely, if you like. So we were the obviously the architect, but we're also the client. So it's our studio, and we were the developer, but then we were also the builder as well. So we kind of close the circle and take on all of the risk ourselves. So the challenges in terms of design that we're used to as architects, also the challenges in terms of the client or the commissioning body, if you like, which we're not at all used to. We've never commissioned a project before. And also we're taking on the risk as the builder. So you're kind of taking on the responsibility is all yours. If it goes wrong, there's no one you can blame apart from yourself. And there's a very lots of very salutary lessons came from that, but also the huge kind of sense of achievement or reward, in the sense that we've procured this building for substantially less money than we would had we gone to an outside builder. I dare say that if it was for another client, there are certain decisions and certain compromises that would have been made that, as an architect, they wouldn't be, your own compromises, if you like. And then as an architect, obviously, it allowed us to some flexibility and freedom in terms of how we approach the design. But equally, there's risk there, because you sort of, you have to achieve a certain level of quality. It's absolutely crucial that this building is put together impeccably, because in a sense it's a showcase as to what you do as a practice. So there's all sorts of challenges that come into it. But like I say, the kind of reward, if you like, is that we're able to work out of our own building. And then there are challenges along the way. So that this kind of concrete chimney is a kind of case in point. We could have gone to a specialist contractor to have this made, but instead we did it ourselves, and probably saved about 50% of the cost of doing it. But on the other hand, had it gone wrong, we'd have been left with several cubic meters of concrete lying around the site. So yeah, you can see in this images the sort of challenges in terms of propping and bracing the formwork. Some quite high drama moments in terms of when the concrete's going into the former. There you can see the kind of the very much the joinery approach that we took to making that formwork. But then at the end of the day, we have this sort of lovely kind of sculptural element that's really important in terms of the architecture and the design of the building. But more importantly, in a way, it's all the stories that came with it, in terms of the time that we spent. This my very good friend Craig on the left. The time we spent putting this thing together. It's almost as hands-on as an architect can get, I think. And then there's the final piece, and there it is, situated within the building. And again, the image on the left, you can see one of the downpipes on the building. So the kind of inventiveness that you can bring to a project when you're the kind of client and you're making the bigger decisions, you can choose where to focus attention. In this case, we focused on a gutter, and also on the partitions, these timber partitions on the right hand side there. So thank you very much. I mean, I hope that was of some interest. Any questions or comments? I'd love to try and answer.
Hello again. Thank you for your time. That was great. I'll just pass over to Damien. We've had a couple of questions through, so he'll take it from here.
Sure.
The first one is just about that last project there. You talked about being on site and being involved in the construction process.
Yeah.
How important do you think that is for an architect to be sort of that hands-on or involved?
Well, I mean, I would say it's extremely important, but there is a big caveat to that. So I mean, for my own development and understanding of things and the kind of understanding of construction, understanding of how things go together, it's been really important, and I think the same goes probably for everyone else in the practice. But there is a kind of a caveat to that, which is that architecture is such a broad subject, it's such a broad topic, vocation, profession, however you want to describe it, that that I'm always find it odd the kind of criticism of someone being a paper architect. I don't really understand the criticism, because I think there's something perfectly reasonable and valuable about being a paper architect. So being an architect that doesn't necessarily build things, because you're helping to move the conversation forward in a completely different way. If you remain an architect just like me, and you want to go on site and get involved in the construction of things, that tends to push you in a certain direction. So it's extremely important, but at the same time, it's not that important. It depends on the direction you're going as an architect. So I think you can overstress it. I mean, it's very important for me personally, but there are, like I say, other architects out there who do extraordinary work, and I think if they get locked into the kind of mode of fixating on things on site, then it would diminish that part of the conversation, if that makes sense.
Okay. So you spoke about the fabrication process in your projects, about the bridges and the rail masts. How are those designs developed in your studio? Is it through digital design or model making, or how does that process come about?
So I think almost always it starts with a sketch. I think we're there are practices that, and there are architects who do an awful lot of work with physical models right at the outset. And then, I mean, we do use computers a lot, and we are a very digital practice in that sense, in terms of everything is modeled on computer ultimately. But I think winding it right back to the start, it's always a sketch. It's a freehand sketch. It's the most immediate way of getting ideas into a position where you can share it and talk about it. I think sketching, always sketching.
There was just another question about that last project again. Would you do the whole process again of being the architect client and be involved in the construction work?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that it's something that we're very keen to carry on working in that kind of mode, if you like. Because although the risk is real, because it's kind of all on you financially, but then also in terms of health and safety. If you think about all the aspects that a contractor will normally look after you. Now, admittedly, you're paying him some money to do this, but he's looking after health and safety. He's looking after his own program. He's making sure that deliveries come through at the right time, so it doesn't get overextended, etc. Nevertheless, I think taking on that risk, the kind of the flip side is that you have kind of complete control, and in a way you go back to the way in which whether it's architects or stonemasons or what have you used to operate, where you had the design and the construction all as part of one process. I mean, I think it's a fascinating way to work. So yeah, I think we're definitely going to try and do it again. We're not going to limit ourselves to that, though. I think that's important.
Yeah. What do you enjoy about working in Aberdeenshire and Scotland in comparison to London?
Well, there are so many reasons to be working up here. I mean, outside of kind of practice, if you like, I mean, I absolutely love the landscape. I love mountains, I love forests and all the rest of it. So there's a kind of personal side there, and I spend a lot of time walking and skiing and what have you. And I think that it's inevitable that crosses over into your work as well, in terms of the interests and fascinations that come into the work. And I'm hesitant to start talking about quality of light and things, because you very quickly stray into very cliched territory. But there is something very special, I think, about the northeast of Scotland and about the Cairngorms and then up into the Highlands in terms of landscape, light, and also in terms of the kind of the culture of the place, whether it's architectural culture, aesthetic culture. It's sometimes sort of overlooked, but I think there's something about the way in which buildings up here engage with the landscape, and I'm not just talking about, you know, your kind of your 19th century button bends and what have you, but or your longhouses going further back, but there's some the architectural qualities up here that I think are quite unique and yeah, fascinating kind of environment to be working in. London's great as well, though. Of course, I mean, London's an amazing place, but I think when the lockdown happened, I was happy to be up here.
Okay. I've one final question. What inspirations or other architects' work has been significant to you as you progressed from university to practice?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think I mean, I could tell you the names of several tens of architects that whose work I think is incredible and you know, really warrants a lot of study and kind of investigation. I might answer that. I might answer my own question later, actually, or after this. But in terms of architects that I've sort of been directly influenced by, it's very hard to say, actually. I mean, you're kind of part of architectural culture, and like I was saying, in terms of paper architecture, real architecture, what have you, it's all part of a kind of a continuum. You're part of that world, and I think you pick up things without consciously realizing it, and I think that's absolutely fine. In a way, you know, the sort of concept of originality or what have you is a tricky one, because you know, while I might think we've been terribly original in the design of, I don't know, our mast, actually the material's been used for about a century. It's of the same generation as Bakelite. Really what we're doing here with this shape is joining the dots of the position of the certain wires that we're trying to carry in space from one mast to the next. So it's, in a way, this is a kind of an approach to design. Whether it's original or not, I'm not sure. I mean, it has a patent, so it's original in that sense. But on the other hand, you can see aspects of this inherent in other people's work, and I think that's kind of, it's nothing to be ashamed of. But I can't quite pin down the architects that I would have kind of followed, if you know what I mean. I mean, I think we're lucky in Scotland. We're lucky in London in terms of the architects who are operating. I mean, in London, you know, you can think of, well, there's all sorts of fascinating practices. You know, people like Neil McLaughlin who do absolutely exquisite work, and you know, you sort of hope that you'll someday do work half as good, you know, of these kind of people. Or in Scotland, you know, the likes of Riachan Hall, you know, Neil Gillespie, who's obviously professor at the school. You know, that kind of level of consideration and and craft, but sensitivity and also robustness at the same time. I mean, you look at the Nucleus building up in Caithness, which I think is an absolutely extraordinary building. But then, you know, the bigger practices, you know, the sorts of, you know, Fosters, Rogers, all the rest of it, you know, they also produce amazing work. So I think, yeah, have Catholic tastes, I think.
That's great. I think that's us coming up to bang on an hour, so we'll wrap up there. We don't want to take up too much of your time.
That's all right.
Get you out into the last remaining sunlight that there is.
Yeah.
But I'll say a big thank you again for taking some time out of your evening and your busy schedule to speak to us and our members. We definitely appreciate it, and we've had some good feedback already on the lecture that you gave us. So that's great. And again, thank you to our members for joining us again. I think we got quite a big turnout today, so that's good.
Really, well, no, thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation, all the rest of it. And I think, like I mentioned to you before the start, you know, if you or any of your peers are kind of interested in coming and saying hello or what have you, we're only just up the road, up on D side. So when circumstances allow, feel free to pop over for a cup of coffee or what have you, and have a look around, have a nosy around. That'd be great. Very welcome.
Cheers for that. And it's, yeah, as you say, it's not far, so definitely take you up on that. But yeah, I'll give you a final thank you and goodbye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.